And now, your host and my dad, Matt Reiner.
Welcome back to the FutureProof Advisor. Today, we're exploring the biological reality that we forget most of what our clients tell us and what that means for the systems we need to build. Here's the thing for today. I was sitting in my office at my house, and it was a Sunday morning when I actually had my time, free time. And it was late November because it was after some college football. And I had a book out, Tiago Forte's book, and I was highlighting just all throughout. I had underlined and highlighted what felt like the 20th insight in an hour because it was like one of those moments when the kids were still sleeping and I was able to really just consume something. And everything had notes around it, and my brain was just going, and it was on fire. And by Sunday night at dinner, I couldn't remember a single thing I highlighted. Not the insight, not the page number, not even why it had felt so important 12 hours earlier. And, the thing is that this had been happening for a while. I'd finish a book, and it kept happening, and I'd close it, and within days, it was like I never read it at all. Same with newsletters that I was reading, podcasts I was listening to, conferences I was attending. I was consuming information only to watch it evaporate. And here's what surprised me the most. The more I consumed, the worse it got. Adding newsletters to my reading list didn't compound my knowledge. It diluted it. My curiosity had outpaced my capacity to hold on to anything. So I stopped. Not reading exactly, but I stopped trusting that reading alone would get me anywhere. And so today, what we're exploring is what I call the advisor's forgetting curve. In reality, we could probably call it the human forgetting curve, but we're going to focus on the advisor side today. And we're going to dig into why we forget most of what happens in client meetings and why that does not mean that we have a character flaw, but it's actually just biology. And many people are probably shaking and saying, I don't forget anything. And I'll tell you that you do, but we'll go to that together because I felt the same way at one point. We're going to look at the science behind memory decay and why it hits the middle of our conversations the hardest, the very part where I believe the real value lives. And then we'll explore the difference between storing information and actually managing knowledge because they're not the same thing. They're actually not even close. This matters because in a fiduciary responsibility, in a wealth management relationship, right, forgetting isn't just inconvenient. It's a gap between what our clients share and what we actually retain. And that gap erodes trust without either party really realizing it. Here's what I've been wrestling with lately. We're living in an age of abundant information. I love it. Gathering it, that's not the hard part anymore. We have sources everywhere, books, podcasts, AI summaries, transcripts, continuing education, whatever it may be. But having information is not what makes us wise or creates impact. It's what we do with that information. It's whether we can turn content into context, whether we can retrieve it at the exact moment it matters, not just when we first learned it. And I often wonder, what's the value of knowing something if we only use it once and then forget it ever existed? That feels like low value knowing, and we have an opportunity for so much more. Here's something that changed how I think about this. I used to believe my memory was pretty good. Better than average, even. I remembered clients' names, their kids, their situation. But when I started actually tracking what I retained versus what the transcripts captured, the gap was humbling. I was remembering maybe 30% of the nuance. The rest, gone within a day. And I realized, if I'm being honest, that I'd be confusing familiarity with memory. I recognized things when I saw them again, but I couldn't retrieve them when I needed them. And I think that that's a very different thing. A few years ago, everything stopped. I'd gotten back into reading. I mean, really reading. I was consuming content that was igniting this curiosity bug that I had forgotten about. And then I added newsletters, great writers, great ideas. The information I was consuming went up 5-fold. And then just hit a wall. I couldn't consume anymore, not because I ran out of time or what to read or that I was bored or I didn't like it, but because there was this growing feeling, this weight that without a system to aggregate and retrieve all this information, my time was being wasted. What I was reading on Thursday night was forgotten by Friday afternoon. And it wasn't just about remembering facts. I wanted to connect dots between different pieces of information. And that's where the real insight lives. That's where wisdom comes from, not from any single piece of knowledge, but from how we combine them. But I didn't know where to start to build the system. And I remember talking to my therapist at the time, was like, I can't keep going. I don't know where to even start, what to do, because I waited for the perfect system, researched note-taking apps. I watched YouTube tutorials about second brains, never actually starting because I couldn't figure out how to start correctly. I should have watched a YouTube video on how to start. Maybe that would have helped. But then I came across a concept called PARA, a knowledge management framework designed by Tiago Forte that organizes information by actionability, not by topic. And I remember the exact moment it all clicked, standing in my kitchen with my phone in hand, reading about how PARA connects insights to active projects. And something shifted. The problem had never been my tools. I had, Readwise as a quote capture app. I had digital notebooks. I had a CRM full of client notes. The problem was that none of them talked to each other. Information went in, but never came out, at least not when I needed it. PARA gave me the connective tissue. Within weeks, the same tools that had frustrated me or led me to nothing became useful, not because they had changed, but because I had added a process to make them work together. And I had this similar challenge with meeting notes, not client meetings, but general meetings. We sit in these meetings and we dedicate an hour and, we talk, we take notes, but then I always had them in like a notebook at times. And then I got a digital notebook, but then I could never find the notes that I was talking about because they were lost in a different notebook within my digital notebook. And it became frustrating. I just started all these notes and then I stopped taking notes and then I didn't have any notes and it was frustrating. But the time when I started to implement PARA across my whole system was a time that I realized that this system is shaping how I think about technology. It's changing how I think about technology in the way that tools without a process create information hoarders, not information users. It's the difference between a library and a landfill. A library gives me this clear ability to go find the information. It's got an organization structure that I can find the titles and the books and the themes. A landfill is I have to go circle through trash to find that one piece of information that I want. Now, let's start with a foundation or the foundation. We have more tools than ever. AI note takers, CRMs, transcription services, meeting summaries that populate automatically. And here's what's happening. We are drowning in data, but we are starving for insight. The big rage right now, and for good reason, is AI note takers. They capture everything, every every figure, every emotional nuance in someone's voice. But having the tool does not equate to retaining and acting on the information. A tool is that quick high. The reality, though, is that without a process for reviewing, distilling, and connecting the information, it all goes to a graveyard. And then the frustration ends up with the tool. It continued to bubble up. I was talking with an advisor last month who had been using an AI note taker for 8 months. And he said, Matt, I have transcripts from 200 client meetings in a folder. And I was like, that's fantastic. That's really good. He's like, I've looked at maybe 12 of them. 8 months of perfect memory, completely unused. That's what I mean by a data graveyard. Information collected, but never synthesized, never retrieved, never applied. And here's where we need to pause and challenge something that we all believe. This idea that we think memory fades like a dimming light, slowly, gradually. We assume that if we just capture the information, we'll have it when we need it. That's not the truth. The reality is that memory doesn't fade. It collapses. It's like a sandcastle at high tide. The water comes in and knocks out the middle, and the top and the bottom are there, but the middle is gone. And here's the part that should concern us. The middle is what washes away first. And then the edges, like that sandcastle, briefly hold their shape until the next wave comes and just demolishes it as well. Think about your last client meeting. You probably remember how it started. You probably had another meeting right after it, so keep that point in mind. The greeting, the initial agenda, and you probably remember how it ended. The action items, the final emotion as you said goodbye. But minutes 15 through 45, that's where the substance stuff happened. The explanation of the trust structure, the client's hesitant admission of spending guilt, the debate about risk tolerance. That's the muddy middle, and it's the most likely to be forgotten. For us as advisors, this is a critical failure point. The why behind the financial plan usually lives in that messy middle. The what, the action items, lives at the end. We remember what to do. We tend to forget why the client cared. German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered that humans forget sit down while you hear this, nearly 50% of new information within 1 hour of learning it. Let that sink in. In 1 hour. We are in 60 to 90-minute client meetings covering portfolio performance, tax strategies, family dynamics. And by the time we've said goodbye and walked back to our desk to that next meeting, half of the unique information from that session has evaporated. And it gets worse. By the 24-hour mark, retention drops to about 30%. If we wait until the next morning to enter notes, which is common, I do it all the time, we are relying on memory that's degraded by 70%. And this degraded number or record becomes the permanent truth of the client relationship because it's what the notes we put in. This degraded memory becomes the permanent truth of the client relationship because that's what we put into the CRM. That quote unquote truth strips away the rich context that actually drives decision making. Something that surprised me is that the Ebbinghaus numbers assume a healthy, rested brain. No stress, no back-to-back meetings, no market volatility. And in our real world, the numbers are probably worse because all of that is relevant. So if we're biologically incapable of retaining most of what happens in a meeting, what do? The answer isn't better memory. The answer is better systems. And that starts with understanding what our CRM actually is and what it isn't. A CRM is a data storage tool, not a knowledge management tool. There is a difference. A CRM is a modern filing cabinet. It stores information, helps us find things when we go looking, which is valuable, especially for compliance. But the CRM doesn't connect information across clients. It doesn't surface patterns. It doesn't tell us that 6 clients mentioned healthcare costs this month. It stores everything we've collected, but it builds nothing from the parts. Think of it this way. A CRM is a warehouse. What we need is a workshop. Knowledge management is about connecting people to content and connecting content to context. Let me give you an example. Imagine a client mentions that they're interested in income investing. In a traditional CRM, that note sits isolated inside that client's profile. It's there if we go looking for it, but we have to know to look. In a knowledge management approach or a knowledge management system, that note becomes a node, an independent atom of information. And we connect it to other clients with the same interest, or node. To research articles on income investing, to fund managers specializing in the space. All of these are different atoms that are connected. And now when a new income investing strategy launches, we don't have to rely on memory to recall who might be interested. We open the quote income investing node and the network reveals the connections immediately. This is the difference between owning a phone book and knowing who needs to call whom. Connection without context is just organized noise. The more I've talked about the past couple of years about AI, clients have followed it and talked to me about it. And I've now noticed the clients that are really interested in what I'm talking about on regards to AI. And that has now allowed for me, because it's within my knowledge management system, that when I come across some interesting tidbits or interesting articles on AI, I have a whole list of clients that have talked to me about that. But I don't have to go and search my CRM and see if anybody said AI. I have that. So I get the context, which is about AI, or the content, and I get the context of who to send it to. And it has allowed for me to pass them more information more intelligently. It allows them to be more connected to me. It increases that trust. And here's the thing. AI can now record and summarize every meeting and every email that we get if we want. It can capture every insight and surface patterns we've never noticed before. But if we don't review those summaries or act on those patterns, we're just creating data graveyards with better headstones. I've seen advisors, adopt AI note takers and actually become less effective. Why? Because they assumed the tool was handling everything. They disengaged from the information entirely. The tool captured everything. The advisor retained nothing. Something that I started doing is I treat the AI summary as a prompt, not a product. Within 24 hours of a meeting, I read the summary and ask myself one question. What did this client share that should connect to something else I know? Sometimes it's another client with the same concern. Sometimes it's an article I read last week. The connection there, though, is the valuable part. The summary is just the starting point. The connection is what creates the memory retention so that I have that next time I talk with the client without having to review every single note that I've ever taken. I mentioned PARA, P-A-R-A, earlier. Let me explain what it actually is. PARA stands for Projects, Areas, Resources, and Archives. It's a way of organizing information by actionability rather than topic. Projects are short-term efforts with a deadline, such as onboard the Smith family, prepare the Q4 tax loss harvesting, whatever it may be. Areas are ongoing responsibilities with no end date. Client relationships, compliance, team management, those would be examples of areas. Resources are topics of interest or future utility, like estate planning strategies, behavioral finance scripts, whatever it may be. Archives are completed projects or inactive items. The shift here is subtle but really important. When a client moves from being a static, quote, area just in the client's folder to an active project like client X is selling a business, that signals to our brain and our system that this file requires high-frequency attention right now. And once the business is sold, it can move back to areas or archives. This fluidity prevents the wall of folders that paralyzes many of us, and it ensures that the most critical client and their needs are always front of mind. So we understand the problem. Memory decays fast. Tools alone don't solve it. We need systems. We are biologically flawed when it comes to memory. The human brain evolved for survival on the savannah, not for retaining 150 different financial plans and family insights. That's just not what the brain was built for. So we augment ourselves with technology, not to replace what we do, but to extend what we can remember. And here's the recipe. First, we use AI to capture the data we would otherwise drop, the messy middle of conversations, the nuance, the emotional subtext. Second, we use knowledge management frameworks to organize that data into actionable knowledge, not filing it, but rather connecting it. And then third is that we use habits to retrieve that knowledge at the exact moment it matters. Let me break down each one of these. The capture side, the most important argument for AI note takers isn't efficiency, it's cognitive liberation. When we take notes manually, our brain has to listen, comprehend, synthesize what's important and write, all simultaneously. That's 4 cognitive processes competing for the same resources. And I know many of us out there are saying, I can do it, but it's really, really hard. And the result is that we capture words, but we miss the meaning. We capture the content, but we miss the context. We have a transcript, but we lost the connection. AI frees the cognitive resources for deep listening. We can focus entirely on the client, their body language, their hesitation, their emotional state, because we know the details are being captured. After I started using AI transcription, I actually noticed something unexpected. My questions got better. They weren't like rehearsed questions. I had more mental space to actually think during conversations instead of frantically trying to remember everything. And so then once we have the capture, we need to distill. And this is where most advisors stop. The transcript, as I've mentioned earlier, sits in a folder. The summary goes into the CRM. We're done. We move on. we've saved time. But the real work is connecting that information to something actionable. When a meeting note mentions a life event, a granddaughter's surgery, a business sale consideration, a parent's health scare, that should trigger a follow up, not because we remember it, because the system does. This is what I mean by building habits around retrieval. It's not about just trying harder to remember, it's about building systems that surface that information when it matters and then figures out what needs to be executed on that information at that point in time. And here's a specific practice that I recommend. I do it the weekly review. It's adapted from David Allen's Getting Things Done, and it's the keystone habit that prevents open loops from piling up. It's 30 minutes, once a week, non-negotiable. During that time, we process all loose notes, review AI summaries for accuracy. And that act of reviewing is itself a form of active recall that strengthens memory. But then during this time, we also looked at active projects. What's stuck? What needs attention this coming week? And we look for patterns. What questions did we hear repeatedly? What questions are being asked? What's holding us back? What themes are emerging across clients? And this is where the magic happens. This is where data becomes insight. Every Friday from 12 to 12:30 is my time. I look at my projects, what progress I have made, where needs more progress. I review my notes that I made. And then I quarterly review a running list of what I call Matt's brain, a list of ideas, thoughts, insights, etc. that I want to explore. And I take a half day to distill those and move them either into a project or to archive. But what it does is that this Friday weekly meeting frees me from having to worry about how everything's going. And that quarterly meeting frees me to say that I don't have to hold all these ideas. I can put them in somewhere and know I have a standard time that I'm going to review them. And so here's what I'd invite us all to consider. Are we building systems that remember for us? Or are we still trying to hold everything in our biological memory and we feel guilty when we can't? Because here's the thing. Forgetting is human. Building systems that remember for us is what makes us more useful than our biology alone would allow. Before I close out, though, I want to step back for everything we talked about today, the forgetting curve, knowledge management, the cyborg advisor approach, it all comes down to a fundamental choice. Are we going to fight our biology or work with it? I still have that Tiago Forte book on my shelf. The highlighter marks may have faded by now, and I honestly couldn't tell you which insight I underlined that specific Sunday morning. But what I can tell you, the insights themselves faded. The system I built around them did not. And that is the shift. We stop expecting or putting our value on ourselves to remember everything. We start building systems that surface what we need when we need it. And paradoxically, that makes us more human in our client relationships, not less. Because we're not splitting our attention trying to retain everything. We're fully present, knowing the system has our back. And here's where I want to land on. In an age of commoditized investment returns, what's the competitive advantage that remains? It's not better performance. It's not lower fees. It's starting the second year of a client relationship without relearning everything from scratch. It's remembering the emotional context, not just the financial facts. It's connecting what one client said about healthcare costs to the 3 other families quietly worried about the same thing and proactively addressing it before anyone asks. That is the unfair advantage. That is the FutureProof Advisor. And it doesn't come from better memory. It's not the FutureProof Advisor. It comes from better systems. The advisor's forgetting curve is an inevitable biological reality. We are not built to retain 150 different financial plans and family information. Our brains evolved for survival, not for this type of fiduciary service. But in a world where trust is built on the retention of nuance, a client's unspoken anxiety, a passing reference to a health scare, a specific communication preference, forgetting is more than inconvenient. It creates a gap between what was shared and what was retained. That gap erodes trust without either party realizing it. The solution isn't trying harder to remember. That's not what I'm saying. The solution is accepting that we will forget. Give yourself grace and build systems that don't forget. We use AI to capture what we'd otherwise drop. We use frameworks like Perry to organize that data into actionable knowledge. We use habits like weekly reviews to ensure we actually retrieve and apply what we've captured. This is how we transform our practice from a data graveyard into a living garden of insight. It takes work, takes effort. This is how we stop learning and relearning our clients, start truly knowing them. And honestly, this is how we give ourselves permission to be human, because the systems handle what our biology can't. So if you enjoyed today's episode, forward it to a colleague, like our episode, leave a comment, subscribe so you're notified. But before you go, answer our one question poll. It's linked in the show notes. And the question is what happens to most of the information you consume? I want to see where you all are, because I'm going to be with the majority likely. With that, I say thank you. Thank you for spending some time with me today. It means the world, and I'll never take for granted. Go out there and be part of the change that betters our industry. Stay well, be well, keep on exploring.